This is the Rich Dad Radio Show. The good news and bad news about money. Here's Robert Kiyosaki.
Hello. Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show. The good news and bad news about money. And today we're going to talk about really the future. You know, it's, in my opinion, the most important project I've ever invested in. But it's a project that the world needs. And I would say it's a very spiritual project. I think some of you will find out why. Because a lot of people get upset with capitalists for making a lot of money. They're just jealous. But anyway, you can also do a lot of good with money and investing. And so today we have a project for all those commies and socialists out there who think that capitalists only make money to make money, which is sometimes true for many of them. But today's project, you'll find, is part of this, I hate to use a name, AOC, Green New Deal. So let me tell you how I came across this Green New Deal. It's, for me personally, a spiritual deal because way back in the 80s, I started studying with Buckminster Fuller. And Fuller started talking about this thing called cosmic accounting. And back then, there was 4 billion people on planet Earth. And today, there's 7.8 billion, I think. So we've almost doubled since the 80s. And what he was talking about was that everybody was rich, 4 billion billionaires. And depending upon the accounting system you used. So if you have read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Rich Dad, Poor Dad is a capitalist book. All it is accounting, income statement, balance sheet, statement of cash flow. That's all it is. And so when I came across this one project, and it was written in, could have been hieroglyphics or Chinese. I didn't care what it was because it was calculus. And I'm reading this thing going, what the heck is this? And suddenly I realized that what I was looking at was Buckminster Fuller's cosmic accounting, how everybody could be rich. Now, for many people today, you know, there's a big thing about the gap between the rich and the poor and all that. There's many reasons for that. But one of the biggest reasons that Fuller said we have 4 billion billionaires is because like the sun, the earth, the tides, the wind are there for everybody. But the trouble without the proper education, you cannot tap into, and I use the word God in the non-religious term, God's accounting or cosmic accounting. And so when I came across Marin Katusa's hieroglyphics and calculus, it took me a long time because, you know, I flunked everything in school, including calculus. And all of a sudden it hit me, this is cosmic accounting. And with that, I started talking to Marin. And I've invested with him for full disclosure. We've made a lot of money. But the one thing about AOC, she's still broke. No, she's probably, you know, all politicians make money in different ways. We all know that. But she would never recognize this deal because all she is a barista who just riles people up about how capitalists are destroying the environment. And I'm an environmentalist. I'm like Johnny Appleseed. I plant trees wherever I go because trees are the filter for a lot of the pollutions in the atmosphere. So today was with great pleasure, I want to introduce a man who's become a dear friend, a spiritual comrade on the capitalist side. And we're going to talk about cosmic accounting and how you can get really, really rich by doing good for the planet, which is a novel idea. But not only that, a lot of people are afraid of China, and they should be. China is one of the biggest polluters and thieves on planet Earth, because the reason I know Marin so well is I grew up in his hometown called Vancouver, Canada, home of the banditos of the world. Every shonky deal comes out of Vancouver, Canada, and I'm at home up there. I like hanging around with the banditos. And I've seen every shonky little deal possible. And I took a company public in China, on the Toronto Stock Exchange, and we struck gold in China. And the thing I love about the Chinese is what's yours is theirs. And the next thing we knew, I was a billionaire for about 6 months. Then one day they said, "Thank you very much. We like your gold deal." And they took my gold mine. So I don't have much. I mean, I love the Chinese people, but the Chinese government, not much different than the U.S. government today. So anyway, with that said, today is a spiritual message, is how you environmentalists can make millions doing God's work. How do you make money saving the environment? And so that's when I met Marin. He has done, his reputation is stellar in one of the biggest bandito towns on planet Earth, Vancouver, Canada. And his track record is stellar. His reputation is stellar. And he's a former calculus teacher. That's why I couldn't read his report, because it was in calculus. Well, we've become great friends, and he is one of the leading thought leaders in the world of the environment, but also for capitalism, and how America can take the lead back from China or the Americas. So welcome to the program, Marin. I'm honored to have you on.
It's my pleasure.
So what's this new book you've got coming out?
Well, Robert, like as we were talking before we went live here, the result of what I'm calling the rise of America, the remaking of the world order, was actually because of our conversations. You would call me on a Sunday morning at 7 a.m. and you would push me to get out of my comfort zone. And, you know, I was comfortable. I'm the largest financiers and independent financier in the world in commodities. We have an incredible track record. And I was in my zone, you know, like a quarterback going to the Super Bowl. I had my game plan. It was working well. We were winning. But as all this material I write, I publish, I write, I move on. And you started bringing up all the stuff I wrote 5, 6 years ago, 7 years ago. And you'd ask these questions and it would bring it up and we would have these interesting conversations, which, you know, anyone out there, if you want to get noticed, publish. You would not believe the relationships you will create by just publishing your thoughts. Make sure the thoughts are sound and thought through and you provide your data. But by doing this, Robert, you pushed me outside of my comfort zone, out of my element. And these discussions that we would talk about kept coming back to the conclusion of the rise of America. And you so generously wrote the foreword for my book. And now it's, you know, as of May 25th, it's live on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, everywhere. And really what I try to do is break it down in my style, very mathematical, very analytical, no emotion. And yes, I took calculus out and put it in the appendix so I don't bore people with my style of, you know, information. But I looked at all the data.
Marin, first of all, you are a calculus teacher, aren't you?
Yeah, you know, many decades ago in my prior life. But it doesn't leave you. Your passion of using your tricks of the trade or your toolbox of skills. And, you know, I look at the data where China is. You mentioned it. China isn't just the world's largest emitter of pollution in all greenhouse gas emissions. But if you took every country in the world in the OECD, that's the developed nations. That's like all 29 countries in the EU, America, Canada, Japan, Korea, add them all up. China still pollutes more than the rest of the countries together. It is so bad that, you know, you just take China's concrete consumption, just concrete, things that people don't even think about, concrete, sidewalks, foundations for buildings, right? It's everywhere. But just China's consumption every year in concrete creates more carbon emissions, greenhouse gases, than all of the cars on the planet, trucks, cars, everything in vehicles combined in a whole year. That's just the concrete. And that's the result of cement. When you heat up limestone, you get cement, and it's a direct 1 ton of the cement creates 1 ton of carbon dioxide. They're trying to bring in new innovations, but this is a pollution machine, and they're not paying for the future costs of this. So that triggered our discussions of this is an incredible entrepreneur idea. You don't need a PhD in calculus. You don't need a degree in engineering, or you don't need to be a geologist to make a fortune in the sector. In my career of 20 years, I have never seen an opportunity of such limited supply that needs to grow significantly and where the demand is so big. At the end of the day, all business is about supply and demand. And if you thought that crypto was big or oil or gold, you ain't seen nothing yet on this sector, because the biggest pool of capital, these green bonds, part of what you're mentioning, AOC and this new millennial agenda, which whether you like it or not, it's here.
Right.
The green bond market since 2013 has been growing year over year by 60%. No other pool of capital is growing at that rate. It's over $1 trillion of capital on the sidelines that needs to meet this. How are you reducing your carbon footprint? The amount of capital available, that if you're watching this and you're a person that wants to be rich, wants a better life, that's why you're watching the show Rich Dad, Poor Dad. It's why you're such a guru and people follow you. You provide a framework. It doesn't matter if you're in Moscow or LA or Nairobi or Bangkok. Anyone watching this can literally make a fortune. And it's not about, I got to invest a lot of money to make a lot of money. This is an incredible opportunity that you can do it in your backyard, and you don't have the permitting risks of developing a mine. I've built a lot of mines, and it's not easy to produce gold. You mentioned about China taking your gold. Well, China's the number one producer of gold in the world. They're bigger than America.
You know why? Because of my mine.
There you go. They took your gold.
Hey, Marin, can we step back a little bit? Because people have no idea why I love Vancouver, the VSE. It's gone now, right? Is it still there?
No, the Vancouver Stock Exchange merged with the Alberta Stock Exchange, became something called the TSX Venture.
Right. So why was Vancouver's reputation was so good or so bad, depending upon your point of view? What was Vancouver?
So Vancouver, which is, in my opinion, the most beautiful city in Canada, was the epicenter for funding the exploration of resources worldwide. And that goes back to, the early 1920s. And then you had characters come, like, for example, Murray Pezim, who you probably met in the 80s, these colorful characters. And to raise capital for something that nobody could see, like exploration somewhere up north, you had to be a colorful character, tell a great story. And it was difficult to raise that kind of money, the pre-internet. And these colorful characters would usually tell tall tales. And once in a while, they would find an incredible gold mine or a copper mine, and stocks would go from 10 cents to $300. And that was what became, the epicenter of resource finance, and that was Vancouver. Then the 2000s happened, and 99% of the deals are junk, and I call them rounders. You don't need, like, I'm the largest financier of this stuff, independent in the world. I do more than big banks, and I'm not a very liked guy in the city because I call them out for what they are. A lot of them are just paper flippers and tell tall tales, but they hide behind the internet and they pay for marketing and all that. You don't need to do any of that. Look at cash flow, cash flow, cash flow.
Yeah, but also the character behind the cash flow. So this is the thing I want to say is that back in the 90s, when I told people I was in Vancouver, they all stepped away from me. Yet I felt at home up there. So there was so many things going on when I met Marin, because he's successful in Vancouver. And as he says, the characters up there are all over the place. But then when we got into Green New Deal, cosmic accounting, and doing good for the planet, although his offering was in calculus, I understood it. So it was a very spiritual move because it is important for the world, for the entire planet. Like one of the other deals I funded in China was a coal deal. Now, does coal pollute?
Yes.
It's horrible. And I was working there to fund it. And it was hard to do it, because I said, I know I'm adding to the pollution, but I'm going to make so much money on it. Good thing the deal didn't work. But that's why Marin and I are kind of joined at the hip on this whole thing, is because as capitalists, we can do a lot of good for the world. And kind of interestingly is China wants to take over the world. So they took Hong Kong. Do you think they'll take Taiwan next?
You and I have traveled to China many, many times. And we in North America look at the map the way our atlas is drawn. But if you turn the map upside down, okay, and look at it that way, China is where America is. And what do they see? They look at, where Taiwan is as the gates to the rest of the world. And that's why, if you look at it from a Chinese perspective, why Taiwan is so important. And going back to pre-World War I and what happened post-World War I, the internally, exactly what Putin and Russia did in Crimea is what the internal CCP wants to do to Taiwan. They're not there yet, they moved on Hong Kong, and the world blinked. They're setting themselves up for Taiwan. And Taiwan, if I was in Taiwan, I would be very, very nervous today, because all of the data shows that China's coming for you.
Yeah. And FYI, people, so when people say, why are you in Phoenix, Arizona, is because where did Taiwan Semiconductor move? Arizona. Yeah. And so they're already established where they call Arizona Silicon Desert. So ladies and gentlemen, there's opportunities all over the world. And so when people are chasing GameStop and all that stuff, there are really major big deals going on right in front of you. And when I met Marin, it was like, oh my God, somebody understands what I've been seeing for years. I'll give one quick thing. Okay, so if you've seen this here, this is the second book, Employee, Self-Employed, Big Business Investor. These guys invest in stocks, bonds, mutual funds, and ETF, stuff that's been packaged by these guys here. So Marin and I on the I side, which means insider, we package deals. So when people say, do you have a 401k? I said, I wouldn't touch the stuff because we know what went into it. So if you understand that, that's why my respect for Marin, to have such a stellar reputation and track record in Vancouver, was one of the first things I checked out. And then when I understood his calculus, which I didn't, and then I understood Fuller, that this project here is to make the world richer. Back then, 4 billion billionaires, according to Fuller. This time, 7.8 billion. So what Marin's going to talk about is not only how we beat China, or at least kind of stop them from polluting a little bit, but also how you can make a lot of money. And that's why Marin and I are joined at the hip on this project. It's spiritual. I mean, I gave him not much money, and I've already made millions, right, Marin?
Yeah. You know, the interesting thing, Robert, is I never had the intention to have all of these, I call them second order effects on what's going to happen with the environment and raise the standard of living of all stakeholders, not just the shareholders. I was looking for the best use of my capital, the biggest bang for my buck. And generally speaking, you know, if you want to buy gold at $100 an ounce, it's over 1,800 today. You need to buy gold before it became popular and before it's talked about in the media. Those are called invisible bull markets. Bitcoin today at 45,000 and change. Everyone's talking about it. But where the biggest scores across the board is when it's not even mentioned in the newspaper. You know, not a single report on the planet by any brokerage firm, Goldman Sachs, BMO, across the board. And these are smart people that work there. Just because they're my competitors in financing deals, I respect these guys. They're smart, they're educated, they're experienced. But one massive thing that no one in the industry has done in their NPV analysis, in their cash flow analysis, and what they expect to get in the future is what is the cost of pollution that is going to come on the balance sheet in the coming years. Mark my words, I will guarantee it. Within 5 years, the International Financial Standards for Accounting, remember how GATA evolved to IFRS, it is going to include on your balance sheet, what is your liability on your carbon emissions.
Everybody, please listen to this. So AOC, as much as I detest her, she's actually going to make me a very rich person because I'm a capitalist. She's still a communist as far as I'm concerned. So when we come back, we'll be talking to Marin about his book, The Rise of America, but also how cosmic accounting, the Green New Deal, is not only going to kind of encourage China to diminish pollution, but also how America can get richer into the future. So we'll be right back with Marin Katusa and cosmic accounting. We'll be right back. Welcome back, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. And today we have fantastic news. Our guest today is Marin Katusa. Like I said, we're joined at the hip spiritually. We're doing what we call good work for the planet, but we're also putting China into check because they're the number one polluters in the world. And I've been guilty of dealing with them and looking at deals that would pollute, like coal and oil and cement. But today we're talking about Marin Katusa's new book, The Rise of America. It'll be out a couple of days after this airs. So please get it early because you will learn about the future and why capitalism can save the world. So Marin, tell us more about the Green New Deal, but also the rise of America. Why did you choose that title?
There is so much division in America right now. There's never been a lower trust in not just the government, but the media across the board by the population. It's at its low point. And I'm a history buff. Yes, you lock me up in a pandemic in my house for a year. I'm going to read and think of ideas. You came into my life about a year ago pushing my ideas, and together we kind of came up with this concept. And every single fact that everyone's bashing America about the US dollar, how they import so many critical elements, all these different factors about how, almost 100% of America's consumption of uranium is all imported. All these, Achilles heels to the economy of America and its way of life. The finance world is betting on China becoming number one. And for good reason. China's done an incredible job. And Uncle Sam and the Eagle has been sleeping and resting on its laurels. But at the end, as I went through all of this data and analysis, there's so many vectors that are already lining up. And I know this is going to sound crazy, but this momentum push of the new Green Deal and these trillions of dollars of stimulus that is coming. Okay, $9 trillion has already been printed. And you look at the billionaires have taken 5 trillion of that. In the last 12 months, the billionaires in the world have increased their net worth by $5 trillion. That's the biggest increase that the billionaires in the world have ever had in any 12-month span. Do you think it's directly related to the government printing by the central banks? Of course it is. You look at these prices. So the billionaires have taken their fair share. And you and I, we've had countless hours of discussions and all this. Whether we bet on the underdogs or what, maybe it's our nature, maybe it's our entrepreneurial spirit, but the data, 10 years ago, America couldn't do what it's going to do now. For example, the cost of green energy wasn't economic. It wasn't cheaper than natural gas or coal. 15 years ago, America got over 50% of its electricity from coal. Today, it's down 50% from where it was 20 years ago. It's going in the right direction. But at the same time, the cost for solar panels, the cost for wind farms, Texas, everyone thinks Texas, oil and natural gas. Well, Texas is actually the Saudi Arabia of wind farms. It is so cheap that a utility can't compete on a natural gas standpoint or coal with the wind farms. Yes, I get it. What happens when it's not windy? Well, technology is going to get to the point of utility scale batteries. We're going there. Don't bet against human ingenuity and innovation. We're getting there. Then you look at, okay, robotics. We have that. IP. China's stealing that. It's well known that America is really the thought leader in IP and patents, and that's there. The missing link was the low cost of capital. 20 years ago, a company like Exxon, they didn't really have the financial incentive, Robert, to reduce their footprint. Now, as the boomers' capitalism is shifting to the millennials, which are now the largest population in the workforce and soon to be the largest pool of capital, they have, what the founder of Whole Foods talks about, conscious capitalism. I call it stakeholder capitalism. They have different metrics and they want, ESG, the environmental aspect, reducing the carbon footprint, making sure it's good 20 years down the road. The social aspect, is it good for the supply chain, the employees, the standard of living, the local community, and then the governance? Are they providing an opportunity for minorities, not just to be labor, but in the executive branch and raise the standard of living across the board? So this low cost of capital, trillions of dollars, Robert, of low cost of capital is available to these executives in these boardrooms of these public companies if they improve their carbon footprint and their ESG. Or, for example, so ESG is the environmental, the E, the S is the social aspect, and G is the governance, ESG. So for example, there's a mid-tier oil services company with pipelines that came out and overnight, they were able to raise $750 million. That's a quick raise for overnight for a, at best, average company. But what they did was they tapped into the green bond market. Normally, the bonds of this company would cost about 10%. That's the how much would they, if they came to me and I want to take First Security and give them $750 million, I'd charge 10% a year in cost to borrow my money. But the green bond market did an overnight. Remember, there's over $1 trillion waiting to get into sectors and companies that are going to improve their environmental footprint and increase the standard of living of those in their environment, the stakeholders. They were able to get money at 5% capital, so half of the going rate in the market, but they had to commit to reducing their carbon footprint by 30% by 2030, make their employees 40% female by 2030, and 5% minorities in the executive branch. It was a start. It was the first energy company that tapped the green bonds. And this was only 10 days ago. So if they don't meet the criteria, their cost of capital, just like what's called financial covenants, if you don't meet your free cash flow metrics, your bond costs go up because you're in violation of your covenants. Same thing on these new green bonds, their cost of capital goes back up depending on what they missed to 10%. So it's in the best interest of these executives today to meet this mandate because their cost of capital is so low. In a world of negative interest rates, for an investor to get that type of free, that are between 10% and 5% is 100%. That is huge if the company commits to it. 20 years ago, that wasn't an option. And that's right there. The cost of low capital, the opportunity of low cost of capital because of these green bonds is going to fuel an industrial revolution in America. And when you talk about put China in check, it's not just going to put China in check, it's going to be checkmate. Why? Because they've gone unchecked with the pollution of other products that the number one customer of China's stuff meaning everything they make is America. Number two customer is the EU, all of the 28 nations combined. And then you got the UK. Everyone's closed a blind eye because it's cheap. Walmart, cheap. Amazon, cheap. But there's an effect to all of that pollution that the next generation is paying. Insurance costs, in the climate costs. That's science. That's math is saying that. Whether you agree with it or not, the cost is going up on the climate costs. So now, by being able to buy American-made, American green, and to be cheaper than goods in China, it's going to turn the Chinese economy upside down. And if I was Taiwan, I would definitely be funding this development growth, because how do you take down a communist regime? Simple supply and demand. How did Soviet Union collapse? Well, oil, which was their number one good, and then natural gas, the number two good, and uranium, which was their number three good, the price collapsed and they couldn't fund their plans. And once the mothers of America, by choosing net neutral, American-made, low-carbon footprint products, can do more to take down communism and increase freedom around the world than any military campaign on the planet.
Amen.
That is such a powerful thought.
Amen. So what?
With the click of a mouse.
Yeah. So there's many things we need to step it up. The thing here is that by educating the world, EU, America, and the world, what a product costs in carbon,
correct,
will determine the buying choice.
Habits. That's right. And it's so easy to do. Just like on food labels and in menus, take someone like me. I love meat. Now, when I was 33 years old, I had an open heart quadruple bypass surgery. It was a shock. I've never done drugs. I've never done anything. I've lived a clean life. But the stress and living on the road for 13 years took a toll on my body. And I had this incredible risk procedure. After that, I started thinking, oh, geez, maybe I won't have that burger. Maybe I won't have that, filet mignon on dinner. I started becoming food conscious. Then I noticed that the menus started showing calories, the fat content, the carb content, and that became legislated by the governments. Until I started seeing that information on packages and on food menus, whenever you go, you'd see that. It became conscious. I didn't think about that before my surgery, but now all the time, and you see it on a menu, it's there and you start thinking about it. Amazon, you think about the incredible information, Robert, that they have on you and me and everyone who uses their platform. They know exactly what I'm going to buy, when I'm going to buy. They have all of the artificial intelligence at the next level. Like, they are so sophisticated. At the same time, they know exactly all of the products in their goods. And by just giving you the option, the user, to go carbon neutral or American made, That is going to be such a difference, because they can say, oh, this racket or trinket or whatever you're buying from China is $20, but it has a carbon cost of, say, $6. That same good in America might cost you $22, but it only has $1 carbon cost. It's a made in America with American material, which everyone knows American steel and American products are a bit higher standard than the Chinese steel and equivalents. And it's paying high-paying American jobs with low-cost energy, green power. You're going to buy American. And that loss of demand from China is going to turn that economy upside down.
They're in trouble.
Totally.
I mean, we're the consumer of the free world will have more power than the military of the free world.
Than ever before. And here's the best part. Jeff Bezos and the Waltons, these people are worth hundreds of billions of dollars. And even though Amazon's investing tens of billions of dollars to go green and what they're calling net zero, investing in electric vehicles, so when they deliver these trinkets, but they're the largest facilitator of pollution on the planet. When the government mandates this, it's in the best interest. They know, Jeff Bezos knows this. He's watching this. He's going to read the book, the last chapter, how I lay it all out. He knows it's in his best interest to be ahead of the government before they mandate it, because then you can kind of direct the policy rather than being behind the policy.
Marin, so let's go back to cosmic accounting. The thing that I really, really loved about what you said was when what you and I are doing is we're producing carbon credits.
Correct.
To offset the carbon footprint of like the steamships, the airlines, the people that have to burn fuel, fossil fuel, and the coal, so we're going to offset that. But the thing that Marin's plan sealed the deal for me was we can now employ indigenous people who live, let's say, in the Northwest or in Canada and all this. So the people that would never really have opportunity for a big city job and may not have the training, they can go into the forests and monitor what's going on in our forests. In other words, we're going to employ indigenous people to help monitor our trees, and which I am a tree hugger I have trees everywhere. But when you said we're going to monitor the survival of trees and the well-being of trees, now we have a lot of trees, we have to protect them. And so by this giving jobs to people who might not have jobs, but more than anything else, what Marin's proposing is we will train these people to be tech savvy. And when I heard that, it completes the whole picture. And that goes to Fuller's saying about cosmic accounting. Our job is to make everybody rich, to take God's abundance and let the people share it. And so that's one of the reasons I started investing with Marin. And that's his book, The Rise of America. And it's going to check the Chinese guys. Unfortunately, Taiwan is in the crosshairs, but Arizona will get rich. And stuff like that's happening. And that's why get the book, The Rise of America, because all this complaining by the left and the socialists and the Marxists, the capitalists are going to solve the problem. Am I fairly accurate there?
Definitely, Robert. And it doesn't matter if you're left or right. It doesn't matter if you're religious or non-religious. None of those aspects right now matter, because all of the vectors are aligning. The only thing that is going to unify the left and the right is this cosmic equation that you're talking about, cosmic accounting, because it's not only saving the environment, it's improving it from where it is.
Yes.
Number two, raising the standard of living. We call them carbon rangers. You and I thank you and Kim for supporting this idea. Any viewer can participate on this. This company is doing an IPO. And the metrics on this, it's Warren Buffett value investing, because we're so early to this. Robert, you and I are the world's largest investors and financiers of this biggest growing sector. This is bigger than Bitcoin, than gold, than oil. And you get all of these second order effects, like the cash flow coming from these. For example, it's not just forests. A lot of people don't know that there's forests in the ocean. You look at the mangrove forest, or what I call aquamarine forest. These bays in Mexico, Australia, Colombia, Brazil, Indonesia, there's 14 million acres of forests in the water in these bays where seawater meets fresh water. And these mangrove forests, a mangrove tree is about 70% underwater, 30% above water, and it absorbs about 10 times the carbon emissions that a land forest, like a pine tree forest on land in a tropical forest or rainforest would. That's 10 times. Also, when it sequesters, when it takes that carbon out of the environment, it goes inside the water, into the peat, into the bottom of the forest, in the ocean, and it stays out of the atmosphere much longer than in a tropical forest. The benefits of that.
Been to, like, the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. It's just sad to see it dying.
Correct. And there's ways. Capitalists are going to save this, but the second order effect, think about the whales, the sharks, the sea turtles, the marine. And why is there this deforestation happening in the oceans? For farming of shrimp. But by carbon rangers, these are the indigenous people. It's not just for the indigenous, it's for all people. We're talking super high paying jobs that you can be, you don't need to be a calculus guru or an engineer or a science major. The technology can be in the palm of your hand, and you can prevent forest fires because of what's going on. And the financial models can predict where the risks for forest fires are. And we've seen what's happening in California and BC every year, the more and more risks to the forest, and they're getting more intense.
And mudslides and damage.
Mudslides, the soil erosion, exactly. And the technology today is there to empower the rise of the standard of living, but the cash flow, it's not just going and being a tree hugger and planting trees. It is like next order, like what we think about in science fiction. We are there today with the technology, but the cash flow on these numbers, Apple computers, just so people understand this, Apple, one of the biggest companies on the planet, came out a week ago and said they're investing in what's called a mangrove forest, or trees in the forest, and their project does about 30,000 carbon credits a year. That's Apple. They've invested millions of dollars in this. The first project that you and I invested in is 30 times the size of Apple's, 30 times, and our cash flows are 4 times. That's the opportunity of anybody watching the show. And Apple Computer, Microsoft, Amazon, Shell, Chevron, Exxon, they all need to offset their footprint because of the cost of capital, and the pool of capital coming is mandating this. They've also come out and said, we're doing this. It's now corporate policy. And here's the best part of this, Robert. Less than 10% of all of the publicly listed companies with over $1 billion market cap have even announced that they have some sort of agenda, never mind actually going and doing it. So if you take the smart guys at Goldman Sachs and Bank of America, Barclays, the World Bank, all these suits who sit there and crunch numbers, they've come out and said that by 2030 to 2050, okay, we're talking about the next 10 to 30 years, this sector is going to grow anywhere from 15 times to 100 times in demand. Okay, I can guarantee you the gold market's not going to do that. The oil market, the copper market, the uranium market, no commodity market is growing at that rate. On top of that, let's just say, Robert, you and I are pessimists because we've lived this commodity market. Let's say it only doubles from here. You and I are going to make 20 times our money from this point on if the demand market only doubles. Right. But here's the craziest part of this. If you take this from when it started in 1997, the Kyoto Protocol, and add every single carbon credit that has ever been produced every year since then, just Exxon going net neutral would absorb every carbon credit. There's something called Geffen good. And Geffen good is this old abstract economic concept that says, as the price of a good goes up, the demand actually goes up. It only works if it's a non-substitutable item. And carbon credits are a commodity that you can't substitute. I can't create a nitrogen credit that can be replaced. Nothing replaces a carbon credit. And the Geffen good is how you make the biggest score. And I'm not doing this to make 1 or 2 or 3 times your money. People are going to make 50 to 100 times their money. And then you get all the positive effects of the spin-off of increasing the sea turtles, the marine aqua life, the caribou, all of the benefits you get, raising the standard of living of the indigenous and local stakeholders. This is the ultimate win-win, and it's the case study. I think if Fuller was alive today, he would be doing this, but he's not.
He would be ecstatic, Marin. Hey, Marin, we're out of time. We'd like to have you come back again. I just want people to understand that even these socialists sound like whack jobs to me, they're going to make me a very rich man because I'm still a capitalist. And I want to thank you for writing your book, The Rise of America, about the next couple of days. This is the end of May 2021, just so you get a date stamp on it. But please understand what Marin's doing. And it's not only good for America, it'll bring China into some kind of alignment and make the world a better place. And that's our job. One last thing I'm going to say is when you invest in, let's say, Apple, much of their product is manufactured in China. You
Correct.
invest in Nike shoes, they're made in China. And so what Marin is proposing here and what she's going to do is he's going to make more people aware of who is polluting the planet and who's not. So the power goes to the consumer, not to the government. So Marin, thank you very, very much. Please get his book, The Rise of America, and let's keep going. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you. And we come back, we'll be right back for the wrap up. And please get Marin's book, The Rise of America. It's one of the most optimistic books I've ever come across. I'm excited about it. And capitalists can do a lot of good where socialists can just complain. We'll be right back. Welcome back. And thank you to Marin and his Green New Deal thing that's made me a very rich man, being an environmentalist. And I'll say this again. Most of these socialists, I mean, they have the right idea. We have to protect the environment, but all they do is bitch and moan. If you're a true capitalist, you can make a lot of money on it. So that's why you should get Marin's book. You know, I mean, what he's talking about is the future of the free world. And the most important thing is we have to hold China accountable, because every time you put on your Nike shoes or your clothes and all that, it's polluting the environment. So what Marin is talking about is power to the consumer to vote for the products they will buy that support the environment. Remember, Apple is produced in China. Just remember that. And they hide their money in Ireland. They're a capitalist company. I like what they do. I'm not disagreeing with it. But that's what the Rich Dad radio program is about, is opening your eyes to capitalism. So anyway, Sarah, what did you think of Marin's statement?
Well, you know, Marin is super intelligent. He's a genius. I mean, so a little bit is over my head. However, what I did catch on to is this carbon emissions, or this idea of saving the environment but making money while doing so, is truly the one thing that should unite the left and the right. Like, how is there should not be an argument as to this. And I think it's funny that, like, we always talk about AOC and the people with the Green New Deal, how, you know, they're going after the rich people. Well, this is making the rich richer.
Well, no, it's making the rich richer, but exactly as the carbon rangers are doing.
Yeah.
You're like, because indigenous person is somebody whose family has been on the land for 5,000 years. That's indigenous. So I'm not indigenous. You're not indigenous. You know, the American Indian is indigenous. The Indians in the Northwest are indigenous. The Aborigines in Australia are indigenous. And the Hawaiians are indigenous. And when you look at the gap between the rich and the poor, it's oftentimes between indigenous people and the new guys. So what I fell in love with Marin is carbon rangers, is we're going to take indigenous people, like let's say they're American Indians or Canadian Indians or whatever they are, living in the Northwest, and we can teach them technology to monitor our forests, the health of our forests and our oceans. And that's what's so perfect about it, and that's why Buckminster Fuller talked about cosmic accounting, that all of us are rich because God wanted all of us to be rich. So that's why when I met Marin Katusa and I started reading his calculus, I was checked out. So academically, I had no idea what he was saying, but spiritually, I understood Marin. So it was a very important program. And
yeah, and we talked a lot about American made, American green, and that's really going to force China, or not force, basically the checkmate onto China.
Right. And the consumer, not the military, has the power.
Right. So it's super. This is one of those episodes you'll have to listen to again and again, to really absorb. But more importantly, get his book, The Rise of America. It's available May 25th, which is yesterday when the show comes out. And then read all his information at katusaresearch.com.
Right.
Brilliant guy, and he puts out, I think, a monthly newsletter.
Right. And so cosmic accounting means God wants all of us to be rich. And the trouble is our schools are not teaching us to be rich. That's why there's no financial education in our schools. So we're taught critical race theory and Black Lives Matter and all that, and that's important. But it's not making us any richer, it's dividing us. So understand what Marin is saying. When you build a carbon credit, it forces a steamship company to buy the credits. And it forces an airliner to buy the credits so they reduce their carbon footprint. So it's a win-win. And if you understand that, you'll understand why God wants everybody to be rich, because energy from the air, from the sky, from our winds, from our land and all that is God-given. And that's what Marin tapped into.
One thing I wish I would have asked him during the show is I think Tesla this year, or in 2020, had their highest revenue, but it was all due to selling their carbon credits. And that's how they were able to raise their balance sheet. And
right.
But then Elon Musk just came out and, he was a big big purchaser of Bitcoin. Tesla was going to accept Bitcoin. And then he just came out 2 weeks ago and said, no, because Bitcoin isn't environmentally friendly, the mining of it.
Correct.
And so it's it's so confusing.
Well, it's because, Bitcoin needs to be manufactured where energy is free. And the countries that do that are cheap will win. So it's more to this whole cosmic accounting than Elon, who was a brilliant entrepreneur, Bitcoin and all that. There's a bigger picture that we need to focus on. And the thing is this, as Bucky Fuller said back in the 80s, back then there was 4 billion people, today 7.8 billion. God wants us to be rich. That's why God sent all this energy to us. And it's not to be just contained by a few corporations. And remember this, every time you buy Apple, which I buy Apple all the time, it's manufactured in China. And they don't care about the environment. So what Marin is talking about is power to the consumer without going to war. And that's probably one of the most beneficial things that Marin is talking about in this book. So anyway, thank you all for listening to the Rich Dad radio program. And my dear friend Marin Katusa, he's a calculus teacher. That's why I didn't understand him. But I understood him as a human being who was concerned about the people and our environment. Thank you for listening to the Rich Dad radio show.